If you lived in San Francisco in the 1970s, you remember when a Victorian flat in the Haight cost just $175 a month, and anyone with nerve could claim a seat at the Fillmore, Tower Records, or a Castro cafe that seemed to radiate new power overnight. In this city, possibility was piled as high as the morning fog until crisis, crime, and a coming political storm threatened to steal it all away. But what was it really like to breathe that electric air? And how did it all start to slip through the city's fingers? Step out your front door in 1970s San Francisco, and the city felt like a patchwork of living, breathing worlds. The Haight still wore the last colors of the counterculture, Victorian stoops splashed with psychedelic murals, sidewalk musicians strumming as neighbors traded stories over morning coffee. On Haight Street, the scent of incense drifted from head shops, and the old painted ladies were not museum pieces, they were just homes, their porches crowded with friends and stray cats. North Beach hummed with its own melody. Espresso machines clattered in Italian cafes along Columbus, where poets and dreamers still gathered at City Lights bookstore. Neon signs flickered through the fog, and the street outside buzzed with the shuffle of chess players and the laughter spilling from trattorias serving family-style pasta for $8 a head. City Lights was not just a landmark, it was a crossroads for anyone hungry for words or revolution. A few blocks south, the Castro was waking up to its new identity. Rainbow flags unfurled above storefronts, some hand-painted, some bold and new, signaling that this was a place where you could finally be yourself. Castro Camera, with Harvey Milk behind the counter, became the unofficial town hall, and Halloween block parties turned the neighborhood into a carnival. Shop windows glowed with activism and hope, and every cafe table was a front-row seat to history in the making. The Mission pulsed with energy, its heart beating along 24th and Valencia. Bilingual signs hung above panaderias, pinata shops, and taquerias, where lines stretched out the door for burritos wrapped in butcher paper. Bright murals exploded across alley walls, scenes of protest, family, and saints, painted by local artists and kids from the block. On weekends, the farmers' market filled the air with the calls of vendors and the scent of fresh fruit, while street festivals brought together families, punks, and poets. Chinatown, just up the hill, felt like a city within a city. Grocers stacked bok choy and lychees in sidewalk stalls. Elders played mahjong in open doorways, and the sidewalks filled with a mix of Cantonese, English, and laughter. Here, tradition held strong, and every block offered a different taste, a new story, a sense of belonging that ran deeper than the oldest alleyways. If you lived in San Francisco, then, you did not just live in a city, you belonged to a neighborhood, each one with its own rituals, rhythms, and anchors. The blocks were alive with color, sound, and the promise that you could find your people, no matter where you started your walk. Music wasn't just background noise in San Francisco in the 1970s, it was the city's heartbeat. You could walk into the Fillmore or Winterland on any given weekend and catch the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, or Santana playing marathon sets for crowds who knew every lyric. Tickets cost less than a night out at the movies, and nobody stood behind velvet ropes. The air inside was thick with incense and sweat, and the walls shook with the sound of guitars that seemed to stretch on forever. Punk was just beginning to snarl its way into the scene. By 1978, Mabuhay Gardens on Broadway opened its doors to bands like the Dead Kennedys and the Avengers. The place was half dive bar, half launch pad, and you could feel the floor vibrate as 100 kids bounced and shouted along to songs that had not even been pressed to vinyl yet. Jazz fans drifted to Keystone Corner or the Great American Music Hall, where you could nurse a cheap drink and hear world-class musicians up close. If music was the city's pulse, Tower Records on Columbus was its record-collecting temple. People lined up on release days, flipping through album covers and swapping concert stories. KSAN radio blasted out the latest tracks, making sure everyone from the outer Richmond to the Mission knew what was happening on stage that week. When the music faded, food took center stage. North Beach trattorias served pasta family style for $8, and nobody cared if you lingered for hours. Mission taquerias handed over burritos the size of your forearm, wrapped in butcher paper, for pocket change. Chinatown dim sum carts rolled by tables crowded with locals long before tourists discovered the secret. In 1979, Zuni Cafe opened on Market Street, introducing a new style, California cuisine, simple and fresh, with a menu that changed every day. Farmers' markets started popping up, and even the fanciest meals felt casual, affordable, and real. Down in south of Market, something new was stirring. The Homebrew Computer Club met in borrowed rooms, passing around circuit boards and wild ideas. In January 1977, a little company called Apple filed its incorporation papers. Xerox PARC, just down the peninsula, was dreaming up personal computers and graphical interfaces. But in San Francisco, tech still felt like another form of art, something you tinkered with after a gig, not a reason to move across the country. Here, creativity was not just welcome, it was expected. Whether you played guitar, cooked, or soldered together a homemade computer, the city gave you room to try, fail, and try again. That was the real magic. Possibility was always on tap, and almost anyone could afford a taste. By the fall of 1977, something electric was running through the Castro. Rainbow flags snapped from windows, and the street buzzed with the kind of energy you only feel when history is about to catch up with hope. Harvey Milk, a camera shop owner with a booming laugh and a stubborn streak, was running for city supervisor, not from the margins, but right from the heart of his neighborhood. For the first time, San Francisco's new district elections meant that a community like the Castro could send one of its own to City Hall. Milk's campaign wasn't polished. It was scrappy, run out of the back of Castro camera, fueled by coffee, late-night strategy sessions, and the belief that ordinary people could change the rules. Volunteers stapled posters to telephone poles and knocked on every door up and down Market Street, asking neighbors to imagine a city where you didn't have to hide who you loved. When the results came in on November 8, 1977, the Castro erupted. Harvey Milk had won, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told to keep quiet or move along. That night, the streets filled with people, some in costume, some just wrapped in each other's arms, celebrating a victory that felt impossible only a few years before. For LGBTQ San Franciscans, it was more than an election. It was a promise that the city could belong to them, too. For a moment, anything seemed possible. The Castro wasn't just a safe haven anymore, it was a launching pad, and if you were there, you could feel the city's heart beating faster, ready for whatever came next. November 27, 1978. The news spread like wildfire. Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone were shot dead inside City Hall by Dan White, a former supervisor. If you were anywhere near the Castro or the Civic Center that day, you remember the sound of sirens, faces pressed to radios, the shock that turned to anger before the sun went down. The city's sense of possibility cracked wide open. 6 months later, the courthouse delivered its verdict: voluntary manslaughter, not murder. That night, up to 10,000 people poured out of the Castro, marching on City Hall with candles and banners. The White Night riots turned the Civic Center into a battleground. Windows shattered, police cars burned, and more than 100 people were injured before dawn. For many, it felt like the city itself was coming apart. Just days before the assassinations, San Francisco woke to the horror of Jonestown. Over 900 members of the People's Temple, many recruited from the city's black and working-class neighborhoods, died in a mass murder-suicide in Guyana. Jim Jones had been a power broker here, and now his legacy was heartbreak and empty pews. On the streets, darkness crept in. Heroin flooded the Tenderloin and south of Market. Overdose deaths tripled between 1974 and 1977, and blocks once alive with music and hope became places to avoid after dark. Patty Hearst's kidnapping in 1974 and the unsolved Zodiac murders haunted headlines, reminders that even in a city built on dreams, safety was never guaranteed. For a moment, it felt like everything that made San Francisco open and alive was at risk of vanishing overnight. Today, the median rent for a San Francisco apartment tops $3,000, a number that closes doors once flung wide. As creativity is priced out, the city's legacy is a warning. Innovation needs room to breathe. The soul of a place depends on who can still afford to dream there.